What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and this is one of those videos that I want to make just to kind of get a feel for whether or not you guys are interested in this kind of thing, right? So recently, Ryan Hurst, who is an actor that really gained a lot of fame in the Sons of Anarchy show, which was amazing, he came out and said that he wanted to play the Sentry Robert Reynolds in the MCU. And as you guys can imagine, this has given way to a lot of discussion on the internet that you guys have probably noticed, where a lot of people are asking, one, why haven't we gotten the Sentry in the MCU yet? Two, are we gonna get him soon? And three, if we do, who's gonna play him? Now, more recently, Daniel Craig is apparently being eyed for some kind of a role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is entirely speculation. No one knows if it's actually the case or not, so that's not something that I would run with. It's kind of found its way into discussions about the Sentry as to whether or not Daniel Craig should play that character. Honestly, I think he'd be a terrible choice for the Sentry, despite the fact that he was a really cool James Bond. They're distinctly different characters, and I think Ryan Hurst is a much better choice. But this really also begs the question, who is the Sentry and why does it matter? Well, in the description of this video, you'll find a link to a video over at Comics Explained that'll give you an explanation that'll go into greater detail than what we're gonna cover here. But the reality is the Sentry is just the result of a ruse, right? It's a trick that was played. So back in 2000, there were a couple guys named Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee, and they actually wrote an Inhumans story, Inhumans Volume 2, which was really, really cool. That was kind of the story they had to write in order to be able to demonstrate they could craft a good story before they created a character, which is usually what Marvel does. But when they introduced the Sentry, they introduced him as a quote-unquote lost character from the era of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, which was largely believable because they were just publishing and creating so many characters back then. It was entirely possible that they made somebody that just kind of slipped through the cracks. He appeared in like some issue somewhere and was never seen or heard from again. And so what you got was a combination of modern day storytelling with throwbacks to the days of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in terms of how the art was done and how the story was told. But the idea behind this is that Robert Reynolds was basically the superhero before seemingly all other superheroes. In more recent years, that's changed, and in fact, Kevin Grievous had actually introduced Adam Brashear as the guy who had basically stood before the Sentry did, but that's a whole different discussion. At the time the Sentry came out, he was the superhero, right? Like, Peter Parker became Spider-Man, became the hero that he was, partly because of the Sentry. The Fantastic Four were friends of the Sentry and actually attended his wedding. The Incredible Hulk thought the Sentry was like an amazing guy. He called him the Golden Man. They were like super good friends, but this guy basically knew everybody. But for some reason or another, he just vanished one day and nobody knew why. And not even Robert Reynolds himself understood what was going on with the Sentry. It's just one day he woke up and his dog had like this demonic voice and he attacked it, and then his wife Lindy ended up leaving him because he hit the dog, and that was basically it. And so as the story progresses, what you end up finding out is that Robert Reynolds was at one point a drug addict, and he had taken what was at the time the modern iteration of the super soldier serum that turned Steve Rogers into Captain America. The difference is that unlike the original super soldier serum by Abraham Erskine, this one was a lot more powerful. In fact, it was 1,000 times more powerful. And so when he consumed it trying to get high, he turned into the Sentry. The downside to this is that where the Sentry is just kind of like this idyllic, almost angel looking superhero, that the dark side of the Sentry, its quote unquote Incredible Hulk, if you want to call it that, is a being called the Void. And the Void is basically the entire embodiment of all the Sentry's powers without any inhibitions. And he's villainous, right? In fact, the Void was so powerful, it was the only thing the Incredible Hulk was actually scared of. And so because of that, the Void ended up returning when the Sentry came back. And you end up realizing that in order to keep the Void from coming back, which was basically why the Sentry vanished in the first place, because the Void was just attacking and destroying things all the time, that what the Sentry, along with Doctor Strange and Reed Richards, had done is they had basically put a beacon on top of Avengers Tower that would constantly emanate a signal that would make the world forget he existed. And when they undid that, the world recalled who the Sentry was, and because the world knew who the Sentry was, the Void returned as well. And so at the end of the story, they all basically band together, right? All these superheroes band together, they fight the Void, they end up having to turn the beacon back on, and the Sentry's forgotten again. Now, the Sentry was eventually brought back in Brian Michael Bendis' New Avengers run in a story aptly called who is the Sentry. Although technically he appeared in the first Avengers story where Electro took down the supervillain prison, the Raft, which was called Breakout, and like he ripped Carnage in half, which was amazing. Like this guy destroyed Carnage in like one shot, right? Like he flew him into space, ripped him in half, and left. It was crazy. But the whole story, who is the Sentry, we also covered on Comics Explained. And basically the Void was so powerful that a full contingent, right? A total coming together of the Avengers, the X-Men, and the Fantastic Four were not enough to stop this guy, right? He was just on a whole different level in terms of strength. It was absurd. But the Sentry is this amazing concept in Marvel because if we're being honest with ourselves, what makes the Sentry compelling or interesting, at least to me anyway, is that Robert Reynolds is basically a guy with multiple personality disorder / schizophrenia. And so when you have a superhero out there who is basically a Superman analog that has schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder, anything can happen. The downside with the Sentry is Marvel's wrote him like crap. So you basically had stories where like the Sentry was defeated by Wolverine or the Punisher, and then you had stories where the Sentry killed Loki. So it's a little weird. His power fluctuates wildly depending on the story that's being told, and a lot of fans will tell you the Sentry sucks. Not really. It's the way Marvel writes him that makes the Sentry suck, but the Sentry in and of himself is great, and having him added to the MCU would be fantastic. One, because it's just cool to see the Sentry, and two, because the Marvel Cinematic Universe could basically be like, we make a better Superman than DC does. Which would be kind of funny if I'm being honest with you guys. But regardless, I think the idea of adding somebody like that to the Marvel Cinematic Universe would really change things, right? And you could have great callbacks to like the early stories of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where you could kind of present the scenario in saying that where Steve Rogers was believed to have been dead in the aftermath of Captain America, the First Avenger, and then of course was actually frozen in ice and discovered some 70 years later. During this 70-year time period, there were attempts to create new super soldiers. One of these happened to be the Sentry. Now, you can follow the comic book story to its exact notes, or you can change it up and do something different. But I feel like a character like the Sentry is great because one of the things the Marvel Cinematic Universe lacks now is just like that guy, right? Like that one guy that everybody rallies around. In the comics, it's Captain America, right? I mean, Captain America he's just that guy. He's got no spectacular powers to speak of, but the fact that he's just got so much military experience in like marshaling forces, knowing who needs to go where and what they need to do, it's cool. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe had that. I mean, Tony Stark was the face of the MCU, but if we're really talking about the leader of the MCU and the various superheroes, I think we'd all kind of have to agree it's Captain America. And in the aftermath of Steve Rogers basically having everything that happened to him during the events of Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, ultimately living his life out with Peggy Carter, showing back up in the modern era, older, basically retiring, depending on what fan theory you follow, living on the blue area of the moon. The reality and the situation that we're in right now is there's no one out there leading the whole Avengers team. There's no one to be the guy who's in charge. We could say it's Black Panther, but unfortunately we know the circumstance surrounding that, so that's not a possibility. Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is just too inexperienced to be a credible leader of the team. Even if the MCU put him there, we wouldn't really believe it. You could say Doctor Strange, but Doctor Strange has always kind of been an outlier out there doing his own thing. You never really saw him as somebody who would really be a leader of the team. And so I think introducing someone like the Sentry or possibly Hyperion or someone like that could really go a long way in being a kind of new Captain America-esque character where they could basically lead the Avengers as we know them, or at least the new Avengers team, and just take it in a new direction. But again, let me know what you guys think about this, right? I mean, I love the idea of seeing the Sentry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think Ryan Hurst is a great character. I mean, there's a lot of fan art out there right now of Ryan Hurst as the Sentry, and it looks great, right? It looks absolutely amazing. He really looks the part. The beard, the whole 9 yards, because the way Robert Reynolds looked when he showed back up in the Breakout storyline, he was like grizzled, had like this beard. He looked amazing. I love the way he looked, right? I don't like clean face Sentry, right? Where he's all like clean shaven and everything. It's like, I want the superhero who looks like he's seen some things, you know what I mean? Like he's been around the block a few times. Like he's lost some friends, lost some family. He's probably had to kill a couple people here and there. Like I want the guy who's just, he's been down that dark path before. You know, like I want that guy, right? Just the grizzled dude, right? Just that looking guy. And the way the Sentry looked and the way he looks when people draw Ryan Hurst as the Sentry, he looks great. He looks absolutely fantastic. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.